Good morning again. As you may have noticed, we're set up a bit differently today, and we're going to have, Lord willing, sort of a guided discussion this morning about what we feel. Several of us have been talking for months about this topic, loving others in disagreement, and we think it's so important that we're actually going to give two separate chapels to this. And so today, we're going to talk a bit about a framework for disagreeing, and then Monday, Dr. Profitt and Dr. Phil and Mr. Josh Avery are going to have a disagreement in front of all of you about several topics, and then we're going to stop and talk about how they're disagreeing. So it's going to be exciting, but I really hope that over these next couple of chapel services you pay attention, because no matter how gifted you are, no matter how great of a speaker or teacher or orator you are, this topic will make or break you in ministry. And I speak for myself, but I believe I speak for the other guys here. This is something that I want to grow in. Yeah, I'm a learner still. Imagine this scenario with me, okay? It's 4:30, you've just finished your campus job, and you do what 99% of your colleagues in school do when you finish. You want a little downtime. And so for most of you, that means scrolling a news feed briefly. And so you're tired and you wanted some edification, so you went to Facebook. And the top thing on your Facebook feed was one of your virtual friends. You're not really friends with them at all, but you accepted their request, and they've posted something. It's probably one of these articles that you see floating around now, like, you won't believe what so-and-so said about this. And then maybe like 4 or 5 sentences, very strong, opinionated conversation about your favorite political candidate or some very hot-button issue that just really sets you off. And so, like most of us, you start stretching your fingers and start machine gunning on your keyboard, and nice response, and you hit post. After all, I'm an opinionated person, right? And then 8 hours later and 75 comments later, if you've never been involved with this, you've certainly grabbed some popcorn and watched this happen, right? Yes, okay. You check back to see if there's new comments. But maybe after, the 75th comment, and perhaps after, 300 plus views, you realize that maybe this wasn't an edifying way to disagree with somebody. Here's another scenario. You're a young pastor. You've just preached your best sermon. It's probably James 1:2-4, right? You've done that one like 100 times, guys, right? So you've preached it, and you even had a cool PowerPoint to go along with it, and you just crumpled it. You killed it, right? And you're back there shaking hands with somebody, all these people, accolades, affirmation, and somebody shuffles up to you, and right in the midst of all that, they start disagreeing with you. Some theological point that you said. It doesn't matter if it's big or small. It really doesn't matter at all if you're right or not about it. The point is, you'll be in a disagreement right then and there. And if you don't have a framework for knowing how to talk about this with somebody, you're going to be in trouble. How about this situation?
That's not hypothetical, by the way. That happens.
It happens to all of us. Even in band services, this happens to me too. People come up to me, do you know what the biggest problem with GBS is? I'm like, no, I don't. Okay? But dealing with these things, very important. Imagine this situation. We were talking about one of our recent alumni in a classroom setting in a Christian school. So Christian parents sending Christian kids to a Christian school, called out in the carpet by a parent because she had the audacity to teach creationism in the classroom. Okay? Disagreement amongst Christians about something that probably most of us would probably believe the same thing about. Or maybe, are any of you planning on getting married someday? Maybe. I've heard tell that it's pretty regular for people to disagree in this marital relationship. Not us, honey, right? Actually, my wife's here today, so I love you. But other people, other couples, they disagree a lot. And we pray for them. So, the point is, if you don't learn how to disagree and love others, you're going to end up burning bridges. And not only as a person that's going to be in ministry, but as a Christian, fulfilling the second great commandment of loving others while in opposition with somebody, perhaps about an idea or a topic. This is very important. And so we hope today that through this guided discussion, you'll get a good framework for learning how to disagree with people. And so I'll be asking some questions. We might jump in and out. We're going to try not to be too scripted, so these are not canned responses. I really don't know exactly what they're going to say. So, Dr. Profitt, why don't we start with you? So I'm thinking about a disagreement. It takes basically three components. I need a disagreeer, so someone comes to me through a Facebook message or an email or face-to-face or a phone call. And then there's me, so there's the person that's being disagreed with. And then there's the topic. Rather than talk about the topic first or even how you view yourself, can you talk a bit about maybe how you view the person that you're disagreeing with? Because I think it's very important.
I think that may be a step that we skip most of the time. I think I get focused on the topic and the rightness of my position rather than thinking about the person who's disagreeing with me. And I think for me, the starting point in thinking about that person is to remember that they are made by God, made in the image of God, redeemed, or at least potentially redeemed by the death of God's Son, made to house the fullness of God, and they're an eternal soul. And if I approach them with that framework, that's going to change a lot of what I'm going to think and say and how I'm going to act if I start with that position. Comment?
Sure, yeah, so that was a great, I like particularly the fact that they're made to house the fullness of God.
Not original, I'm sad to say.
That, well, it's scriptural. And then I think even, so Paul says we have this treasure in earthen vessels, right? So this person that is disagreeing with me is an earthen vessel who's been infected by the fall, who I don't have any idea what the brokennesses are that are behind their perspective, their choice of language, and I want to remember that apart from grace, that could be me, right? Especially if they're doing a poor job, I think, of doing their disagreeing. Those things come to mind.
Let me ask you this. Before I ask you, I'm going to ask you how you view yourselves in these arguments, because this is something we need to spend some time with. But what about intent? So when someone comes to you with a disagreement, are you eager to engage with them? Should Christians avoid all disagreements? I mean, it seems like Jesus was pretty good with people, and he disagreed with people a lot, and we have record in Acts of Peter and Paul disagreeing and problems in the early church, disagreements. Do I avoid those things? Am I eager to engage? What are your thoughts about that?
I try to avoid disagreements about what I consider trivia. Now, that raises another question, what's trivial and what isn't? But I'm not too concerned if people don't share my opinions. Now, it's different from my beliefs about truth, right? These are my opinions. If somebody doesn't share my opinion, it doesn't bother me too much. And particularly if they're approaching me sharply about my opinion, so it's not likely that that disagreement is going to go well easily, and it doesn't matter. That's the kind I want to avoid.
Okay.
I have a question. How do you tell the difference between your beliefs about truth and your opinions?
I know, that's a very good question, because in one sense all of our beliefs about truth are opinions as well. I know that I have some opinions that I have arrived at from looking at evidence, but I can see easily how I could have arrived at a different conclusion, and I could change my mind without altering any of my fundamental beliefs.
Okay, but your beliefs, even if they're more trivial or open to, I mean, this is not something say that the Scripture speaks clearly about. You still have a belief about it. And so when I was in school here, I was in class with you, and so you're quick-witted, you are very persuasive, you're good at debating people. Like, they're wrong, obviously, like as Doc was saying in your office the other day, no one holds a position they know to be wrong, right? So, I mean, how do you avoid just jumping in and they're wrong, I'm right, let the chips fall where they may? You're zealous for the truth, you know?
Well, I was talking ideally. I don't always avoid jumping in. And I'd forgotten about that class. That's unfortunate that you have those memories. Now I have to be honest. If I have a relationship with this person, and this person's my friend, and I love this person, and they don't share my belief about coffee, who cares? Who cares? Now, if they don't share my belief about how to get to heaven, I better care if I love them. And sometimes people will come at you with fire in their eye, and the best thing you can do is deflect that to a different day. Now, in that class in particular, we had a lot of just dandy discussions because we all knew we were there to disagree and to hash things out. And I had one of those this morning, actually, with a colleague. I think he implied I was crazy at one point in the conversation. And we were very calm and having a good time because we understood what we were talking about. We understood this is not a life or death matter. This is not a heaven or hell matter. This is a matter of a difference of opinion. I don't know if that's answering your question or not.
But embedded in what you're saying there, so you're in this class, you recognize this isn't life and death matter. But, you know, I've encountered people who support partial birth abortion, people who are pro-LGBTQ civil rights as well as gay marriage. And coming back to the framework that we're talking about, one of the things that I have to remember is that I have even if I don't know, have never met this person in my life, I still have a relationship with them that's bigger than this particular disagreement. And that is, they're part of the human family, and that Jesus takes how I treat them personally. So inasmuch as you've done it unto the least of these, you've done it unto me, and as much as you've not done it unto the least of these, you've not done it unto me. And so, and I want to be a tool of good in their life. You know, do good to all men. Salvation is one kind of good. There are other kinds of good. And so it's kind of like looking around the issue that they've just dropped right in front of me and saying, you know, there's a person over there that I have a relationship with just because we're part of the same human family.
Yeah. So distinguishing between the person and their position on whatever topic you're disagreeing about. Let me ask you this. How do you discern in the moment when I'm supposed to speak up for truth and when I'm supposed to, for lack of a better term, shut up? So when someone comes to you after a service, probably they'd come to you, Dr. Phil, and say, what are your beliefs on divorce and remarriage? How are you going to respond to that?
So I've got Proverbs 20, verse 3 says, keeping away from strife is an honor for a man, but any fool will quarrel. Proverbs 25:8, do not go out hastily to argue your case, otherwise what will you do in the end when your neighbor humiliates you? And even the New Testament, 1 Timothy, of course, you know, I have additional roles. I'm an ordained minister. I've just preached a sermon. I did. At a local church, I preached James 1:2-4. And I had, in two cases, one out west and one locally, people hot after, angry at what I had said. One guy, he was angry that I had said that nothing comes into the life of a Christian without God's approval, because he understood the word approval to mean God's smile. And what I meant was God's permission. So I learned from that disagreement, and I don't use the word approval anymore when I say that. I use the word permission. And another lady just said, you know, you use Job as an illustration for this, and I don't like Job, and I don't like what God did to him, and I don't think that's right. And at that point, I said, yes, ma'am. I appreciate that. I learned the word I appreciate that from a book on verbal judo written for police officers. That when a police officer is encountering someone who's angry with them, they appreciate. Doesn't matter. All it means is I hear you, I understand what you're saying, but it sounds nice. It's kind of calming.
So I'm sort of hearing from both of you maybe that you tend to avoid disagreements, especially if they're public after a service or something like that. So what about the person that says, well, I'm just opinionated and I'm a strong person and, well, I'm a strong, good leadership. They're willing to fight it out at a moment's notice. How would you respond to somebody that has that sort of thinking?
I think I would qualify as a person with strong opinions. Those who know me well would know that. I think strong opinions can be spoken softly just as well as loudly. And my personality and my family upbringing tends toward the bombastic. In my family, if you're red in the face and you're yelling and you're waving your arms, that does not mean you are angry. That actually means you're having a great time in a discussion with one another. It turns out other people's families aren't like that, including my wife's. And so I have learned, unfortunately, I've learned by offending people that my opinion is probably going to be a lot more persuasive if I don't let my tone get in the way. Now, is that fair? Is it fair that I have to change my upbringing and my personality? Well, this goes back to looking around the topic to the person. If I think that person's wrong and it really matters, then in love, I want them to change. And if I know that my style is going to make changing less likely, I think the law of love compels me to change.
Yes. And it also involves the framework that we talked about was not just the other person, but ourselves. So I have to say, number one, I'm limited. I can be wrong in part or in whole. My understanding is limited. I'm culturally situated. That's what Aaron's saying when my family does it differently. He's saying, I had a cultural situation that shaped me. Their cultural situation is different. Not only that, not only am I limited, but I'm fallen. I am not yet 100% like Jesus. And because I'm not yet 100% like Jesus, it may be that my brokenness is making it difficult for me to see something that, even though they're broken, they can see. And so I should listen. That's, James says, be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. Well, the quick to hear part is part of the proper humility. I need illumination by the Holy Spirit. Unless God opens my eyes to see things, I won't see them the way they are. And I've been wrong before, and more than once, on a whole range of things. And I learned this from Dad. There's a little statement. This is my best understanding, subject to revision at any point upon future light. And that reflects that self-awareness that we're fallible and we can be wrong.
I just want to jump in on two things. I think sometimes people hear us say things like, I understand that I could be wrong, as if we don't believe we're right. And I love a line from G.K. Chesterton that helps me on this. Maybe it'll help some of you. It's not bigotry to think you're right. It's bigotry not to be able to imagine how you might have gone wrong. And I actually think imagination comes into play here. If I can imagine myself into another point of view, another culture, it may help me understand better why someone sees it so differently from me and is equally sure they're right.
Even with a hot button issue in your life personally, or something that, man, if there's something that I can go from 0 to 60 emotionally about some topic, because of family background or anything else like that. How do you determine how significant something is in the moment? So Aaron said, Dr. Profitt said, he said Aaron, so I'll say Aaron because I probably will again. How significant something is. So who gets to determine? Obviously, the person that's disagreeing with you might think it's very significant, and it might not be a big deal, or vice versa. How do you determine within, I believe in Dr. Phil's class, categories of truth. Like how big of a deal is this? How do you determine that in the moment?
Go ahead. So, well, number one, it's really inconvenient to have to grab your categories of truth sheet and pull it out on the moment and say, hang on a sec while I figure out where this falls. So it's good to have thought through it ahead of time. I've got a set of questions. Does this issue determine whether a person's saved or not saved? That's category one. Does this issue determine whether a person's in one large theological camp, like Reformed versus non-Reformed, or is an issue that people in the same theological camp disagree about and that splits them into denominations? Or is this like which homeschooling curriculum is the best that best helps kids learn math, which is way down here. There's no denomination formed around a math curriculum. It's down here in the personal opinion category. And I may have an opinion about whether Saxon math is better than Bob Jones math, is better than Staff and Rod math, but in the big scale of things, that really doesn't matter. And so I have those questions are what help me kind of, when somebody says, look, I'm a gay Christian, and that doesn't mean I'm celibate. That means I practice my homosexual attraction, and I'm okay with God. He's just moved it right out of 4 and 3 and 2 into 1, because there are texts that say you can't enter the kingdom of heaven and be a non-celibate, same-sex attracted person.
So are you more likely to engage someone when it's a disagreement about a higher level of truth, or are you less likely? Or it just depends, walk in the Spirit?
Well, so I have a number of factors that I think about. One factor I think about is anybody else going to be affected by this besides me? We're sitting alone in my office, and the person brings this up. Nobody else is affected besides me. Second question I ask, does this person show interest in hearing an alternative perspective, or is this just a preaching opportunity for them? And if it's just a preaching opportunity, I may say, well, that's interesting. I'm not on the same page that you're on that, but thanks for sharing. And just bypass the disagreement. If they show, why would I do that? Well, Jesus said, don't throw what is holy to the dogs. Don't cast your pearls before swine. And a swine is someone who doesn't value a pearl, okay? They value other things, but not pearls. So if they're not going to value what I have to say, then I'm not going to share it. So other people affected, are they open? What would you add to that?
I think, I don't know if this is an addition to it, but I was thinking if it matters to the person who's disagreeing with me, I think I owe them at least a hearing, which is what you said. If I think it's, because you asked, what if they think it's important and I think it's trivial? Yeah. Well, I think love leads me to give them a respectful hearing and acknowledge that I've heard what they say, but I'm not going to engage in disagreement if it's trivial, or especially if they can't hear, if they don't have ears to hear. That's just going to create strife. And perhaps this is foolish, but I sometimes feel like if I engage in a disagreement at the wrong time, I may sort of inoculate them against the truth at a right time from a different voice.
So, to use an analogy, if they're not ripe fruit, or if they're not going to hear anything you say, despite the fact you think they're wrong, you pray for them, but you let it go. What about something that Dr. Phil said in our meetings we had before this? he always, if someone comes up and asks him something, what do you think about divorce and remarriage, he'll say, well, what do you think? Because it's a great way for them to do what they're probably wanting to do in the first place, which is tell you what they think about it. So that's great. So moving on, a question about engagement. So you've determined that their intentions are good. You feel like this could be an edifying conversation. What are some ways or methods to engage somebody in a disagreement? For instance, my modus operandi has been mostly, I want to persuade the disagreeer to my position at any cost. And that's kind of how most of us operate. We disagree about something, which homeschool math curriculum. I want my curriculum to come out on top in the end, okay? But maybe there's some other ways. Would either of you like to start with that?
Yeah, you take it.
We talked about some ways, and I just, a comment in passing, competitiveness is a curse, isn't it? Those of us who are deeply competitive have a problem not winning. At least I should speak for myself. I have a problem.
Let's have an altar call right now. Who wants to come forward?
We kind of have a scale here. You want to take the first three and let you finish the last three? Probably the least engaged in the sense of conflict, at least, is just a presentation of views. Here are some views on that issue. Now, I shared when we were meeting ahead of time, that one can get you in trouble. I tried that in a Sunday school setting at one point, thinking I was diffusing the situation by simply saying there are other positions. And I had somebody in there that didn't like that idea, that there were multiple points of view. So even that can create tension, but it tends to be less conflicted because you're not necessarily advocating for a point of view. A step more engaged would be an exchange of views, particularly after you have heard what they have to say. And just in passing, I think we're using the word hearing in a very deep sense. When I have heard what you have to say, I can explain it back to you to your satisfaction.
Right.
And if I can't do that, I probably haven't heard you yet. And I think a lot of my trivial disagreements end up being times where I haven't even heard the other person yet. But after I've heard their point of view, then they hear mine. And we understand each other's points of view better after that. Another step up would be evaluation of the merits of different views. And here's where obviously it can start to get a little conflicted because you're looking at the pros and cons of different viewpoints, one of which you hold and one of which the other person holds. But I still think that can be done fairly calmly and amicably, particularly in the context of a good relationship. So those are the first three.
There are people who, probably the person who reacted in your Sunday school class, felt that presenting options was to deny that there is a truth. Okay. And that's not true.
Right.
There are other ways of viewing this besides the one I just espoused, but I really do think it's not true that presenting options is asserting that a thing isn't true. No.
There are wrong options.
Yeah, there are wrong options, and people hold them, and some of them, there are other options that may be right.
Yeah.
So you were talking about an eschatological position. Is it pre, post, mid, pre-wrath, rapture? And there's more than one option. Pre-trib is not the only option that exists out there and that is held by people, and that's why that categories of truth is helpful, because it's not a 1, it's not a 2, and in many cases it's not even a 3, because most denominations have people who hold a plurality of positions on that topic. So having the options doesn't mean you're not committed to truth.
Right.
Sometimes, though, I feel compelled to argue for a position. Okay, and that is that we can explore the options, we can evaluate pros and cons of options, but now I want to say, here's why all other options besides abortion is taking of a human life should not be held. Okay, and I'm going to argue that opinion. Now, my goal there, sometimes my goal may be for them to hear a person intelligently state the position. And my goal really isn't to persuade them, because I don't think they're persuadable. You know, when I was in grad school, I was the lone Wesleyan Arminian around. And oftentimes, I don't know that I converted any of my classmates to become Wesleyan Arminians, but one of my goals was to have them hear somebody intelligently, biblically support that people can forfeit their salvation, even though they ended up still disagreeing with me, right? So that would be a goal in debating. A debate is so we go from arguing a position to debating, and the difference there is if Aaron and I disagree, but we have been asked to come represent our positions to you, and our goal is not to persuade each other, but to persuade you that one of us is right. That's what's going on in a debate, where you're wanting your listeners to be persuaded. And sometimes I'll engage, not for the person I'm engaging with sake, but for the sake of the people standing by, right? You want to get that last one?
Sure. We see one more level, and I think we're all in agreement about this, that we don't consider an appropriate means of disagreement, and that's inciting a reaction from others. When you take a position, or you take a position in a way that is intended to produce an emotional response, usually anger, we think that falls outside legitimate disagreement and in the territory of sin. You're creating a stumbling block. Your intent is to offend a brother or someone who could be a brother. But while we see it as an illegitimate type of disagreement, we also see it a lot in our world, in our culture. And so it needs to be on here, but we think that's one step beyond what a Christian should go.
And you're not saying that if someone is outraged by your statement of opinion,
Right.
that you've sinned.
It's the intention.
Yeah.
It's the intention.
If you intend to outrage by your statement of
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, Ephesians 4 tells us that we should be eager to maintain unity. So if you're someone that is eager to have strife, or you kind of enjoy making other people angry and upset and quarrel, you're constantly getting into little battles. I believe the cool word is high drama all the time. That's sinful, and that's not loving others when you disagree with them. It's great. So we've talked about some engagement. Why don't we have about 10 minutes left. Let's talk some strategies. What have you learned to do and not to do? Maybe just some practical, this works really well for me when I'm talking to somebody and disagreeing. Some strategies. Why don't you start first, Dr. Profitt?
Actually be interested in the other person's point of view, even if you're really not. Affirm that you are and you want to hear what they have to say. Because we've touched on it several times. Sometimes people disagree with you because they want you to hear what they have to say. They're not interested in persuading you. That leads to exploring understanding and reasons. And that's actually why in the disagreement I had with a colleague this morning, he could imply that I was crazy, and it wasn't at all offensive. We were exploring different perspectives, and he was saying, I kind of operate from this perspective that people who think X are just crazy. Well, it wasn't offensive at all. We were exploring understanding and perspective. It can be helpful to raise questions that do not attack the other person, but ask them to respond to an idea. So not even saying, I think X, what do you think about that? But how would you respond to someone who thinks X? Right? You want to jump in?
Yeah, that's what I remember before I went to grad school. Dad said, Phil, you need to hold your view out here like this, so that when the professor opens up with his .50 caliber machine gun and just fills it with holes, he hasn't filled you with holes, he's filled this. So I've heard that some people believe such and such. What do you think about that? Whoa, that was a really bad idea, wasn't it? And I don't have to say that was my idea. As far as things not to do, that's stupid. Why would a person say something like that? that's derogatory language. It's inflammatory language. You're stupid. You're a liar. Only an idiot would hold that opinion. And then there's other unhelpful things like I had a friend. The first thing he said when we were growing up about any topic where he disagreed with me was, "I disagree." It's like, okay, thanks for letting me know that. Next. It just didn't move things forward helpfully. Or, "You're wrong." You know, maybe I am wrong, but maybe they are wrong, but that's not a good way to.
Can I even add there one that is a little touchier, but I think is equally problematic is that offends me. And here's the reason I think it's problematic. You have just shut down conversation because you have said that the other person cannot continue to advocate that point of view because it's a personal attack on you. Now, I don't think you should put up with people saying offensive things, but I think we should show them why it is problematic, why it's wrong, why it's hurtful, rather than simply saying, "I'm done with you."
Yeah, that's good.
Do you feel like we talked about this a bit in the office, but is there certain body language cues or things that you force yourself to do, or habits that you have a hard time breaking when you discuss with people and disagree?
Yeah, Phil's illustrating the crossed arms, which is a very welcoming posture to have when you're disagreeing with somebody. I try not to. I'm crossing my legs right now to hold my papers, but I find that any sort of physical barriers you put, crossed legs, crossed arms. If I'm tense about a discussion, I often catch myself with the clenched fist, hopefully in my lap. But it's amazing what will happen when I force myself to open that hand up. It really does make a difference in how I feel. I've had some wonderful friends have helped me learn some tics that I have that I didn't even know about. I was in a meeting probably 4 years ago now, and I was disagreeing with people, and somebody called me on my facial expression, and I said, "What are you talking about?" Yeah, exactly. And every person in the room said that my facial expression was disdainful and off-putting. Well, if 3 out of 4 people say I'm wrong, I'm probably wrong. And so I've tried to work on that facial expression. I'm not sure I'm there yet, but I've worked on it.
I remember I was having a conversation with Dr. Tom McCall and other people at ETS. And I don't know if you've observed this about me in class, but my eyes go up and right when I'm seeking information. And he said something, and I moved my eyes up and right to seek information. He said, "Don't roll your eyes at me." I was like, "I didn't roll my eyes at you. You did, I just saw you." I was like, okay, I got to recognize that my information-seeking body language is being interpreted as eye-rolling, dismissal, disdainful, and I've got to work to control that if possible.
Similarly, I close my eyes when I'm processing a lot of times, when I'm teaching, when I'm a student, and that can be so offensive that I took to, when I was in classes at UC, to telling a class at the beginning of the semester, if it was going to be a discussion-oriented class, look, I may sometimes close my eyes when I'm listening to something you're saying. That's not me shutting you off. That's me trying to hear you better by cutting off visual stimuli so I can really focus on your words. And I think that helped me avoid offending some folks.
How many people have had disagreements about whether it's hot or cold in a room? And it's because they haven't learned how to distinguish between their perception and reality, right? If you want to have a disagreement, say, "It's hot in here," and somebody will say, "No, it's not." Okay? If you want to have a discussion, you say, "I feel hot." Does anybody else feel hot? It's an I statement versus reality is X way, right?
Yeah. And I think we default in disagreements to you statements. You really believe that? You know, as opposed to, I think, if I'm understanding correctly, I think you're saying X. Is that correct? And when I remember to use I statements, it helps diffuse situations a lot.
If you get in one that's too hot, how do you scale things down?
Great question.
Yeah. For me, the biggest problem when a discussion gets too hot is the rapidity of it. I talk fast, and I think on my feet quickly, and it gets me in tons of trouble because the retort can come before my brain has processed fully. And what I have found is the more I love the person I'm discussing with, the slower I am to respond. And what that's teaching me is that when I want to keep a conversation at a good level, I need to slow down and process first.
So my brother and I were at the raised voice, red face level of discussion about a lesson that he'd written on speaking in tongues. And I realized that I've allowed this to escalate too far. I'm actually starting to feel emotionally involved in this. And so my tactic was to say, okay, let me see if I understand you properly. Have I understood you to say, and so by moving from stating to reflecting, here's what I've heard you say. Did I understand this properly? Did I understand? It's like I backtracked, I backed it down off of that tense moment to, oh, I didn't actually hear you. And no wonder you thought I meant this when I didn't mean that at all, and this thing over here, and we started to sort out. Mm-hmm. We'd run past all that, making our assumptions.
Mm-hmm. I remember being in premarital counseling with my wife, and between that and what Dr. Brown would say in class, we've tried to handle our disagreements this way, in that the one person speaks, the other person has to shut up and not say anything. And when they stop, you have to restate, I'm hearing you say this before you move on, because a lot of times what I'm hearing you say is not what you're saying. And then I feel like that can really diffuse a situation that can escalate quickly, both with the interrupting and I'm assuming something you're saying that my fallen ears are hearing that in fact you're not saying at all.
One of the advantages of Facebook and other written means of communication is that no one ever misunderstands tone or intention. Yeah. And so one way to de-escalate is to change the venue.
Okay. When is it time to do that?
For me, it's time to do that when I'm starting to feel emotional about this disagreement and my fingers are ready to write an emotional, hostile response. And I have deleted emails that were fully written and were beautiful. And I have walked out of my office and down the hall and resolved it very quickly and easily.
Which office? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, if I'm surprised by a tone in an email, then that's a good flag for me that I need to shift from written to verbal, face-to-face if possible.
One more thing that I find helpful if I'm in a disagreement to help me control the emotion is a little mantra that I sometimes need to say to myself, because I can feel personally attacked very easily in disagreements. And I kind of went through earlier how to see the other person. That's how I see me too. Made in God's image, redeemed by the death of God's Son, a citizen of the unshakable kingdom of heaven. The kingdom is not in trouble. I am not in trouble. And when I operate out of that mode, it's much easier for me to work through things. Even if I feel attacked and slighted and demeaned, I can respond like Jesus would want me to.
That's good. We're almost out of time, and so just maybe, why is this so important? Why are we taking 2 chapels for this? Maybe talk a bit about consequences of disagreement, the bad way, or the bad ways, and then maybe just share a personal example, either of a time that something had a potential to go down the wrong road and it didn't, or sometime it went down the bad road and you learned something from it.
Do you have a bad story or a good story?
What's that?
Do you have a bad story or a good story?
I've got lots of bad stories.
So
he said he has lots of bad stories.
I think it was my second year of teaching Greek at Bob Jones University, and sitting on the front row was a freshman who, inside of the first or second week of class, spoke up and said that he had read extensively on the subject of Greek textual criticism and knew for a fact that the King James was the only viable English translation, and the Textus Receptus was the best Greek text. Now, at that point, I was significantly better read than he was at that point, but I decided in that moment, I'm going to just completely let this slide. I'm not even going to address this. I just thanked him for his comment and moved on. And 6 years later, I was reading a textbook in the basement, doing my laundry of the apartment building, and this same student walked up to me and said, Mr. Brown, because I was still Mr. back then, Mr. Brown, I come from a King James only church, and do you have any advice on how I can help them see past their King James only perspective on versions? And I thought to myself, there's absolutely no chance this conversation would have ever happened if I'd have attacked him as a freshman. And I could have blown him out of the water. He didn't have a chance. But it wasn't worth it. And in fact, this same person came here to GBS, visited the campus, was interested in what God was doing here because I'd kept the door open rather than just...
Sadly, my story goes the opposite way. Many of you will know that I went to a state university, and for whatever foolish reason, I thought it was a good idea to let people know right away when I met them exactly where I stood. And so I thought it was funny to introduce myself to folks as a far-right-wing extremist Christian conservative. As you can imagine, that opened a lot of doors for me to represent Jesus. Unfortunately, I didn't catch how stupid I was until I was in graduate school, and I was looking back, and I realized that I had had virtually no opportunity to impact any of those people for Christ. They had no interest in hearing about my God because of how abrasive I had been in a very initial encounter. And I had to repent of that. I mean, the Lord and I had to do some business around that. And realizing how much damage I had potentially done, and honestly making it a prayer request that the Lord would bring other people into their lives who wouldn't botch it like I had, caused me to realize how much I needed to change my tone. And that is the ultimate long-term consequence. When you represent Jesus and you bear the name of Christ, you can have heaven or hell impacts on people. Some of those folks I was able to go back to and apologize. Many of them I would have no idea how to contact. I've tried in some cases and can't do it. So can I add a positive outcome from disagreement? Well, sometimes I think we think of relationships as vases, and if something happens in a relationship that's unpleasant, the vase has fallen, it's shattered, you might glue it back together, but it's always going to have those ugly cracks in it. Am I the only one that feels that way? Other people feel that way about relationships? I don't mean like your boyfriend, your girlfriend. I just mean friendships. Anything goes wrong, it'll never be the same again. Maybe I'm the only one. Don't think so. I've learned that relationships are like plants. Plants can go dormant. Plants can be pruned. Plants can go through rough seasons. But with the right care, a plant can flourish again. And a disagreement done well doesn't hurt a relationship. It builds it and it strengthens it. So just as doing this badly can have serious problematic consequences, doing it well can actually have a positive influence in the relationship in the other person's life.
I want to give a bad example for myself, lest it seem like I always do it right, because I don't. I've done it wrong a good number of times. One that's kind of like an iconic example of doing it wrongly was disagreement I had with my dad one time. We were, I think we were talking about Cornelius, and I was feeling pushed and pressured, and so my response was, I hear what you say, and I totally reject it. I've had that quoted back to me on multiple occasions. That is not the way to have a disagreement. What it said was that I was feeling defensive and cornered and didn't know how to get out of my corner and wanted the conversation to stop. And there are much, much better ways to say, you know, thanks for sharing that with me. I'm not exactly sure what to say right now. Let me think more about that, and if I come up with something intelligent to say in the future, maybe we can talk about it, rather than I hear what you say and totally reject it.
Well, thank you guys very much for being willing to do this today and for your honesty. And why don't we give them a hand for doing this today? And